Okay, let's jump right in. I can identify the reservoirs and processes of the nitrogen cycle by labeling diagrams. Well, before we really get into that, maybe we should just stop for a second and remind ourselves what a reservoir is and what a process is. So, what is a reservoir? What is a process? All right, good. So we remember those two things. Okay, so we've seen cycles of matter already. We just did a huge cycle of matter, pretty important one for our planet, and that takes care of two elements. Who can remember what two elements we just covered? That's right, hydrogen and oxygen. And we covered those by focusing on the water cycle. Very important. Now this cycle impacts the new one that we're going to be learning today, nitrogen. So why is nitrogen one of the big six? So remember, these are the only 6 elements that we're focusing on out of 92. And the question is, what makes these 6 elements so special? Why are we focusing in on just these 6 elements? And why are we focusing on nitrogen? What makes nitrogen so special? Okay, so yes, nitrogen is critical to the survival of organisms. And here's a few examples: amino acids and nucleic acids. And we can see right there is the nitrogen. Okay, so that's a crucial part of an amino acid. And if we zoom in on a nucleotide, I think you'll recognize this. What important molecule do nucleotides make up? That's right. Okay, so there is the nitrogen. It's pretty abundant in this molecule, and that's why that's called a nitrogenous base. Okay, and just to remind ourselves and make sure we've got this, very important, these make up DNA, RNA, and very important, ATP. Okay, so nucleic acids are the building blocks of DNA, RNA, and ATP. All right, so moving on. Okay, so here we see another very important molecule for the biosphere, chlorophyll. And here again is the nitrogen. Okay, so now we know why this is such an important element to life on our planet. And we just learned one of the reservoirs. So what is the reservoir that this slide is showing? Okay, so we know that the biosphere is a really important reservoir for the nitrogen cycle, and life is, where that nitrogen is found. So the question really is now, which sphere do you think contains the largest reservoir of nitrogen? It's not the biosphere. It's the atmosphere. Let's just recall what the composition of the atmosphere is. Who can recall that? Okay, great. So yeah, that's right. The atmosphere is comprised of 78% nitrogen gas. The other 21% is oxygen, very important for us. And last but not least, we have the 1% other gases that are just trace gases, inert gases, things like argon, and carbon dioxide And as we all know, with carbon dioxide, it might be a really small percentage, but little goes a long way. All right, so we just learned that the atmosphere is the biggest reservoir of nitrogen. But there's a problem because living things can't just breathe in the nitrogen from the atmosphere and use it to make molecules like DNA. Diatomic nitrogen is chemically unreactive. It's pretty inert. It takes a lot of effort to break that triple bond. And so because of that, nitrogen is a limiting factor in most ecosystems. So where does the nitrogen come from that is getting into the biosphere, getting into living things? How does nitrogen become biologically available? Well, that's where the nitrogen cycle comes in, and some pretty important organisms are a huge part of this. Okay, so we started our last unit, Feeding the World, with a movie, Dirt, the movie. And the movie depicted the soil microbes as these cute little guys, right, that were super important, and they talked about the biodiversity and the fact that there were like billions of them just in, a teaspoon of soil. And this is why that was such a big deal, right? It's because of nitrogen and what those soil microbes can do with it. They can take nitrogen from the atmosphere and they can fix that nitrogen and make it biologically available. So the first type of bacteria that we're going to focus on here are the nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in legume root nodules. So this is a symbiotic relationship, and it's really a great example of mutualism. This is a truly mutualistic relationship because the plants give those little bacteria living in those nodules a really great place to live. They give them sugars to feed them, and the bacteria give in return nitrogen in a biologically available form to the plant, so the plant can make all of those important other molecules that the rest of us need to live and grow. All right, but these aren't the only guys. There's also these guys, and there's just this whole group of really amazing microbes that are doing all of these chemical reactions that involve nitrogen. And as you can see, it's giving you this cycle, and things are moving around and going back and around, and right, and we've got so many different kinds of microbes that are responsible for the cycling of nitrogen, and I should say the recycling of nitrogen that's taking place in the soil and in terrestrial ecosystems. All right, so terrestrial ecosystems are only half of the story. We need to look at aquatic ecosystems also. And what's really great about this is that we have really awesome examples of aquatic ecosystems right here in the classroom. So this picture is showing a fish tank, and this is why I'm always yelling at the people who have fish tanks, you need to do a water change. And we can tell that just by looking at the amount of algae growth that's happening inside of the fish tank. And that indicates to me that there's a buildup of nitrate in that fish tank. And the problem is, especially with the cichlid tank, there's no plants to take up that nitrate. So it accumulates in the water and it causes a bloom of algae. And we're going to focus on that a little bit more tomorrow. But you can see again that the microbes are really important to this whole cycling process. We've got some microbes here, right? There's decomposition happening in the gravel, and that involves even more microbes. And there's microbes in the filters of the fish tanks, and I have these little bioballs that sort of are a substrate for the microbes to grow. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at both nitrogen cycling in terrestrial ecosystems and aquatic ecosystems, and we're going to label some diagrams that really get into the details, and I want you to add those details to your diagram. All of the organisms, all of the processes, the reservoirs, and all of those chemicals that are all important to the nitrogen cycle.